I knew I was invisible the moment my own manager introduced me to the room like I was a temp from accounting. "This is Daniel. He has been involved with Aegis," he mumbled while Keith from marketing, who once spelled algorithm with a Y, nodded along like he was Moses parting the development roadmap. Never mind that I had architected the entire platform from whiteboard to beta. Aegis was my brainchild. I had pitched it during a lunch break 2 years ago, coded the prototype over long weekends, and shepherded it through every bureaucratic hurdle with duct tape and coffee. And now, as it started catching the attention of analysts, it had apparently evolved into some collective corporate hallucination where no one remembered who started it. What burned was not just the credit theft. It was the smiling indifference. When Gordon from product nodded solemnly in meetings and echoed my exact words 15 seconds later, like he just translated them from some divine realm, it made my stomach turn. Exactly what I was about to say, he would smirk, and they would nod. No one laughed when I said it first. Aegis was supposed to be the thing that changed that. It was a clean, scalable infrastructure fix that quietly saved the company millions of dollars. And it was working. We were ahead of schedule, under budget, and solving problems nobody even realized were problems until we solved them. But every win got quietly reassigned to some colleague with a polished LinkedIn headshot. Do not get me wrong, I was not looking for parades. I just wanted one person to say, "Hey, Daniel, you built something good." Instead, the chief technology officer mispronounced my name in a company-wide meeting and thanked Timothy for leading the Aegis initiative. Timothy, who once asked me what an API endpoint was, got a round of applause. I was 48 years old, with over 2 decades in the industry. I knew the signs. But I stayed, keeping my head down and cleaning code merges at 1 in the morning. I answered tickets with kindness and kept a spreadsheet of every decision approved and time-stamped because my gut told me I would need it someday. And then came the whispers of organizational realignment. It is never a whisper about you until your calendar starts disappearing and your badge stops working. Even as the walls shifted, I wanted to believe Aegis was too valuable to be tossed aside. We saved hundreds of billable hours and prevented client churn. But in corporate, value is whatever someone louder says it is. I remember one Thursday morning, we were preparing the quarterly usage review. I had pulled an all-nighter, polishing the graphs, double-checking the uptime metrics, and turning every bullet point into chief financial officer friendly language. I walked into the meeting bleary-eyed and hopeful, only to find my slide deck already replaced. My numbers had been revised by Keith, who had sent a last-minute update in a friendly font. I left early that day, sat in my car with the air conditioning blasting even though it was October, and just sat thinking. Not about revenge, but about how many times a man like me builds the engine and then gets thanked for being a team player while someone else drives it off the lot, with his name scrubbed from the patent filing. I thought about the contract I had signed, about the clauses I had once laughed at, and about a conversation I had with an old legal advisor, Lawrence Miller, who said, "Daniel, do not assume anyone remembers what you did. Document everything." So, I started backing things up quietly off the network. I bought a new laptop with my own money. I mirrored the entire logic of Aegis's framework in a sandbox environment. Clean, proprietary, untouched by their servers, nights and weekends. No one knew. No one asked because no one ever really looked at me. Not long enough to see the storm I was building. Not yet. Regina Vance arrived like a thunderclap. Sharp heels, sharper cheekbones, and a Bluetooth headset surgically fused to her skull. Day 1, she walked through the office like she already owned the walls, dropping corporate jargon like confetti. Half of it sounded like it was scraped off a PowerPoint template. Everyone smiled. Everyone nodded except me. I sat in the back during her first all-hands meeting, watching her rearrange our roadmap like she was organizing a crime scene. Projects got axed mid-sentence. Budgets were realigned. She called it disruption. I called it a slow-motion disaster. When she got to Aegis, she did not even say the name, just a hand wave. "We are sunsetting some legacy initiatives that are not aligned with future-forward objectives," she said. Legacy. Like I was a fax machine. At the end of her first week, 4 people were restructured into early retirement. Regina brought in her own people, a new operations lead, a new product manager, and a new business visualization strategist. Nobody said my name, not once. The team still came to me with bugs, but it felt like they were sneaking out of class to visit a forbidden teacher. I smiled, nodded, kept fixing things, but my gut started screaming. That was when Lawrence Miller pulled me aside. Quiet, brilliant, the only legal advisor who brought his own mug to meetings because he did not trust the break room dishwasher. He found me in the elevator lobby one morning, leaned in, and whispered, "Back it all up, off network now." I blinked. Why? He did not answer, just walked away sipping black coffee. That is the thing about Lawrence. When he gives you a warning, you do not ask for a paragraph. You just listen. I started digging into the systems immediately, doing my homework under the radar. I downloaded what I could when I could, encrypting my backups and utilizing air-gapped drives. I loved Aegis like a child, and I simply did not trust the new babysitter. At first, it felt paranoid, but then Regina started realigning boards. Tickets disappeared, and my access was quietly limited without explanation. Then I saw a digital card labeled Aegis Decommission Timeline. There was no mention of me, just a list of shutdown milestones approved by Regina and her hand-picked manager Peter Briggs, who once thought a basic data exchange format was a new protein bar. I did not rage and I did not cry. I just opened a fresh folder on my personal desktop and labeled it Aegis Guard. I already had a quiet limited liability company registered from a side consulting gig a year prior. It was dormant, legal, and unused. Now it had a name and a future. Aegis would not die, it would just go home. The deeper I looked into my original employment contract, the more I realized something critical. The intellectual property of Aegis had never been formally transferred to the company. There was a clause, buried in Section 6, Clause B, which stated that intellectual property ownership passed to the corporation only upon final deployment, certified integration, and formal written sign-off. We were still in internal beta. Regina had halted the rollout, which meant the engine was still in my garage, and she had just slammed the brakes halfway down the highway. Under federal copyright law, specifically Section 204, subsection A, of Title 17 of the United States Code, a transfer of copyright is invalid unless it is executed in writing and signed by the owner. Since the contract conditional transfer was never triggered, the rights remained mine. To make sure this ownership was bulletproof, I filed the business registration documents through a third-party service, registering a two-person limited liability company in Delaware. Julian Brooks, who had years of venture experience, agreed to act as our silent partner. He suggested registering Sentinel Technologies as a Delaware C corporation rather than a simple limited liability company, but I insisted on starting with a simple two-person limited liability structure to keep initial operations lean. This Delaware entity cost me exactly $158 in filing fees and a slice of my soul. I had always told myself I was not that kind of person. The ones who prep exits and whisper about startups over cocktails. But you become that kind of person real fast when someone tries to erase your fingerprints from your own invention. I rebuilt Aegis Guard from the ground up, writing the code on the same laptop I had used for my graduate thesis. It was slow but reliable. No company spyware, no repository leaks. Every single line of logic was fresh. I spent long nights restructuring the database queries, replacing the bloated legacy libraries Vanguard had forced us to use with clean, native functions. I sandboxed the entire system, documenting the development steps, storing timestamps, and keeping clean records of my work off network. This engine was mine, and I was going to make sure it stayed that way. The air around the office got tighter over the next few weeks. People smiled more nervously, and Regina's new team started skipping invite-only meetings. I stopped getting calendar requests altogether. But I was not idle, I was building. I had the blueprint, the code, the use cases, and all the lessons learned. I designed the rewritten platform to be more elegant, less bloated, and built for multi-client deployment with modular compliance architecture baked in. I worked nights and weekends, keeping meticulous logs of my development timestamps to prove independent creation. Regina gave me all the time and silence I needed, because she did not see me. She had no idea that the quiet developer she ignored was building a lifeboat. I knew the end had arrived the moment my communication channel logged me out mid-sentence. I was typing a response to a junior developer, walking him through a system error when the screen went gray. Login failed. I tried the browser version, but nothing worked. My calendar vanished, my badge access was suspended, and my corporate email account was completely erased. The call came 30 seconds later. Regina's voice, syrupy and smug, poured through the speaker. Daniel, we have decided to sunset the Aegis project effective immediately. Your role is no longer aligned with our strategic priorities, so your access has been revoked. There is a packet coming from Human Resources, and you do not need to return to the office. Good luck out there. It was the way she said good luck out there. Like she was sending me into the wilderness with a granola bar and a wink that lit the fuse. I did not yell, did not stutter, and I did not plead. I just said 5 words, but you forgot one thing. She went quiet just long enough to register confusion, and then the line went dead. No follow-up, no clarification, just a click. I sat there in my quiet living room, phone in one hand, staring at the blank screen of my work laptop. The silence in the room became absolute. You think you know rage? Try building something from nothing, nurturing it, only to have it ripped away by someone who cannot tell a database from a doorstop. But I did not scream. I reached under my desk, pulled out a flat black case, and unzipped my personal machine. Aegis Guard was ready. The first system outage hit exactly 3 days after they escorted me out of the building. It was not a major crash initially, just a small glitch in the client access portal, but it triggered a flurry of anxious emails between departments. I watched the warning signs ripple across public vendor channels from the comfort of my living room, sipping a warm tea as the system I had held together with digital glue and midnight patches began to unspool. By the end of the week, the minor glitch had escalated into a full systemic failure. Aegis had never been just a simple tool. It was the unseen scaffolding behind 3 separate departments. User authentication, billing verification, and automated compliance tracking were all hard-coded into its core architecture. Regina and her team did not know this because they had never bothered to ask. They viewed Aegis as a legacy nuisance, so they had deleted it without any transition protocol or backup plan. The operational fallout was immediate and severe. The billing system got stuck in a recursive calculation loop because of the missing Aegis data validation modules, causing the support team to work 70-hour weeks and manually edit database records to prevent massive invoicing errors. The development team was forced to manually route client data using outdated command line scripts. Marketing lost its critical analytical tracking, and billing sent multiple duplicate invoices to our largest accounts. One developer told me that a marketing manager actually broke down during a virtual meeting after the database failed in front of a prospective buyer. The sales team was in a state of panic, calling emergency meetings every hour to figure out how to stop the bleeding. Regina Vance attempted to pacify them by blaming the errors on external cloud provider outages, but anyone with a basic understanding of our architecture knew that the system was collapsing from within because she had deleted its heart. I did not celebrate, but I watched the collapse with a quiet detachment. You hope a house survives the storm, but you know it cannot stand once you remove the foundation. To keep myself focused and productive during this time, I established a strict daily routine in my apartment. I would wake up early, brew a pot of dark coffee, and sit by the window to write code while the city woke up. There was a quiet satisfaction in building something complex without the constant interruptions of corporate meetings. I spent hours refining the user interface of Aegis Guard, making sure it felt intuitive and reliable. I also added detailed testing protocols that would allow potential clients to verify data integrity without having to access their live databases. My legal advisor, Lawrence Miller, checked in on my progress and confirmed that the independent creation logs I kept would prevent Vanguard from claiming rights to my new work. He assured me that as long as I documented the timeline of every code commit, our legal position was airtight. Instead of dwelling on their self-inflicted crisis, I focused entirely on my own company. Aegis Guard had just landed its first potential customer, a regional healthcare provider named Pinneridge Health Services. They were searching for a secure intake database that could interface with insurance records without crashing under heavy loads. They did not need a flashy presentation. They wanted something that simply worked. I offered them access to my sandbox environment. loading it with 1,000 anonymized sample records so they could test its latency. Within 2 weeks, they signed a formal pilot agreement. It was a mid-five-figure deal, which was relatively modest in the tech world, but it was not about the money. It was proof that my engine was viable and that I could run a business independently. I handled the onboarding myself, updated the documentation, and built a clean dashboard to monitor server metrics in real time. When the client launched the first module and encountered 0 errors, their technical lead sent me a brief message, asking why other solutions were not built this way. It was a small validation, but it meant everything to me. It proved that my engineering philosophy was sound and that Vanguard had discarded a goldmine out of sheer bureaucratic incompetence. Then, right on schedule, the messages from my former team started arriving. They did not reach out directly, of course. They sent a junior engineer to ask if I had kept any personal notes or documentation that might explain why the automated compliance alerts had stopped triggering. I did not reply. Instead, I opened a secure, encrypted mailbox I had established under a pseudonym and composed a message to one of the parent company's board members, Clara Hastings. Clara was a quiet, analytical presence on the board who had always asked the most difficult technical questions during quarterly reviews. I kept the email direct and professional, stating that my firm had deployed a secure infrastructure platform in the healthcare sector that resolved the exact operational gaps left by their recently terminated internal project. I attached a summary and a demo login, signed it as the founder of Aegis Guard, and hit send. I knew she would follow the breadcrumbs, and all I had to do was wait for them to realize they had thrown away their own future. The parent company launched what they called Operation Horizon before the internal leaks and rumors even reached my ears. It was a sleek initiative designed to identify and onboard a next-generation platform to replace the failed internal Aegis system. According to the board minutes, Clara Hastings quietly flagged, they had allocated a $12 million acquisition budget. They were bleeding clients, and their current database errors were costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars in weekly operational overhead, threatening to destroy the reputation of the entire firm. My Delaware limited liability company, Aegis Guard LLC, submitted a formal response to their request for proposals under a shell entity named Sentinel Technologies. We presented our platform under the version name AG9, highlighting our successful pilot with Pineridge Health Services, our Zero-C metrics, and our clean, independent intellectual property trail. To structure this proposal professionally, I worked closely with my silent investor, Julian Brooks. Julian had years of experience in early-stage financing and helped me draft a solid financial model. We kept the initial acquisition terms straightforward. A complete transfer of the AG9 platform, transitional support services, and clear licensing boundaries. We made sure that documentation showed Sentinel Technologies as a highly focused, emerging player in the infrastructure space. Julian Brooks was a longtime investor who knew the industry inside out. He spent hours reviewing my architecture diagrams and business plan, helping me polish the pitch to ensure it looked like a venture-backed enterprise rather than a one-man operation. He helped me structure our Delaware entity, Sentinel Technologies, as a parent company with Aegis Guard LLC as a wholly owned subsidiary. This structure created a layer of corporate anonymity that kept my name off any public filings Vanguard might search. We structured the financial proposal carefully, asking for a $12 million acquisition price, which we knew was the exact amount the board had budgeted for Operation Horizon. We wanted the board to see that we were not a gamble, but a complete, turnkey solution ready for immediate deployment. Regina Vance tried to dismiss our bid immediately. During a weekly leadership sync, she laughed and told the committee that Sentinel Technologies was a tiny shop with no scale, running what she called vaporware. She presented a slide deck depicting our company as a high-risk vendor that would compromise security. But Clara Hastings did not laugh. She pointed out that our technical metrics were superior to the clunky corporate alternatives Regina was pushing. Clara formally requested that Sentinel Technologies be moved to the second round of evaluation. The board agreed, leaving Regina visibly frustrated. But I was not celebrating yet. I kept my head down, refined the documentation, and prepared for the next step. That step arrived at the TechBridge Summit in San Diego. The event was a massive gathering where venture capitalists and tech executives drank expensive coffee and talked about future trends. I attended not to pitch, but to establish a physical presence. I wore a tailored suit, swapped my old glasses for contact lenses, and walked the floor as the Director of Strategic Partnerships for Sentinel Technologies. On the second afternoon, I spotted Alan Reynolds, the Vice President of Corporate Acquisitions for Vanguard's parent company, sitting alone at a lounge table. He was looking over a printout of the RFP submissions, looking tired and frustrated. I walked over, introduced myself, and offered my card. Alan blinked, staring at my face for several seconds. "Daniel," he said, standing up. "Daniel from the Aegis Project." I smiled and shook his hand. "I am representing Sentinel Technologies now," I said. We sat down and talked shop for an hour. Alan was curious about my departure, and I explained that my focus was on building modern infrastructure rather than managing internal politics. He did not ask further, transitioning into the technical challenges. Vanguard-facing, he admitted they were struggling with major database sync issues and desperately needed a turnkey system to prevent client churn. He looked exhausted, admitting that the leadership team was under immense pressure from the board to find a replacement immediately. I pulled out my tablet and showed him a live demo of AG9, demonstrating its zero-latency synchronization and modular compliance features. I ran a mock test showing how it handled 10,000 simultaneous write operations without a single packet drop. The graphs on the screen updated dynamically in bright green, showcasing a clean architecture that was far superior to the system they had discarded. Alan was deeply impressed, noting that the board was looking for a solution with our exact architecture. He said they had spent months looking at bloated legacy platforms that would take a year to integrate, whereas AG9 could be deployed in weeks. I explained that we had built it specifically for rapid onboarding, with detailed documentation that any junior developer could understand. By the time I walked away, he had promised to fast-track our proposal. That evening, I received an official invitation to present a live demo to the acquisition panel. The trap was set, and Regina had no idea she had already walked into it. The final presentation took place in the parent company's executive boardroom on the top floor of the corporate headquarters. The space was a massive chamber of glass and polished steel, designed to project authority and make visitors feel disposable. I arrived early with Julian Brooks and our legal counsel. We sat on one side of a long mahogany table, setting up our laptops while the board members filed in. Regina Vance sat at the head of the table, wearing a tailored navy suit and looking as confident as ever. She nodded to the board members, completely unaware of the identity of Sentinel's founder. She assumed this meeting was a mere formality before they authorized the acquisition of a minor utility startup. The meeting commenced, and Alan Reynolds introduced us. I stood up, walked to the projector screen, and began the demonstration. I did not focus on slide decks or marketing jargon. I opened the live environment of AG9, showed the real-time data flow, and displayed the metrics from our pilot with Pine Ridge Health Services. The board members watched in silence. The system was fast, stable, and clearly designed to replace their failing database structures. When I finished the technical walkthrough, I leaned against the glass table and looked directly at Regina. Her expression shifted from professional indifference to absolute shock as she recognized me. She tensed, her fingers tapping rapidly against her tablet. "Daniel," she said, her voice thin and sharp. "What is this? This platform is an unauthorized copy of our internal Aegis project." I turned to the board's legal counsel and slid a folder across the mahogany table. It contained a copy of my original employment agreement. The contract stated that Vanguard owned intellectual property only upon final deployment and certified integration, I explained. Under Section 204, subsection A, of Title 17 of the United States Code, a copyright transfer must be executed in writing. Because Regina terminated the project and revoked my access during the beta phase, final deployment never occurred. The ownership of the codebase reverted entirely to me. My firm rebuilt this platform independently, and Vanguard has no legal claim to it. The board's chief legal officer put on his glasses and reviewed the documents. The room became completely silent. The only sound was the rustling of paper. He cross-referenced the dates of Regina's termination order with the system logs of my last access, confirming that the files had been locked before any integration sign-off was completed. After a long minute, the legal officer looked up and nodded to the chief executive officer. "The contract terms are clear," he said. "Final deployment was never signed off. The intellectual property belongs to Daniel Thorne. This meant that the company had no right to use the platform they had been depending on, and Sentinel Technologies held all the leverage." Regina stood up, her face turning pale. "That is absurd," she protested. "We spent months on that project." She looked around the table for support, but every director avoided her gaze. They were business executives, and they knew when a hand had been lost. They were not going to risk a multi-million-dollar copyright lawsuit to protect her pride. The chief executive officer silenced her with a hand wave, asking how she had managed the termination without checking the intellectual property clauses. Regina had no answer. She sat back down, staring blankly at the table as she realized her career was collapsing. Her hands shook as she closed her laptop, realizing that the very project she had sunsetted had become the platform that would now cost the company $12 million to acquire. She had tried to paint me as an irrelevant legacy employee, but in the end, her own arrogance had made me the most valuable person in the room. The board did not debate. They had clients threatening lawsuits, and Agenine was the only system that could save them from massive financial losses. The chief executive officer turned to me and agreed to the acquisition terms. "We will acquire Sentinel Technologies for $12 million, he said, standing up to shake my hand. He asked if I would return to lead the integration team as an employee. I shook my head and smiled. "I will provide transitional support as a contractor," I replied, "but my time as an employee here is finished." I packed my laptop, shook hands with Alan and Clara, and walked toward the exit. As I passed Regina, she looked up with a mixture of anger and defeat. I did not say a word. I walked out to the elevator lobby, tapped my old badge against the scanner, and watched the light turn green one last time. I stepped inside the elevator, the doors slid shut, and I finally felt the quiet satisfaction of a developer who had reclaimed his creation. The company had spent 2 years trying to convince me that I was a minor cog in their machine, but today they had paid $12 million for the privilege of admitting they were wrong. I was no longer an invisible employee. I was a successful founder, and the engine I built was finally in my control.